Okay. Okay. All right, I guess we can start. Hey everyone, thanks for coming. Can you hear me? Great. So, Serverless Hacking 101. About 2 years ago, I got a phone call from our CEO. All right. How about now? One. Is that okay? I can get closer. Okay. So about 2 years ago, I got a phone call from our CEO. He told me, "Hey, we're building something for serverless, and we want you to come and help us make it secure and help us defend our customers." Of course, I said, "Let me think about it." Then the minute I hang up, I went to Google and said, "What the is serverless?" And there wasn't too much information out there 2 years ago. There was some, basically, mostly around Lambda functions and other cloud functions. So then I went and said serverless, I wrote serverless security, and there was none. Really, nothing. So I did some research, and I found it that it's interesting because it's a little bit different. It's similar to what we might be familiar with web applications and cloud, but it has some other angle to it. And in this talk, I'm going to show what is the difference and how we should approach serverless applications. Okay, so I'm working at a company called Protego Labs. We have a serverless security solution. If that interests you, come find me after the talk. If you want to find me on either of these, make sure that if you like the talk, to follow me on Twitter. All right, the agenda. We'll start with some basic information about what serverless is, serverless security, how it works. So we'll have some base ground to work with. Then we'll see some demos about how we can hack into serverless applications or have some fun, exploit it, get some information out of the cloud account. Gonna mention some related work I've been working on, and then if we have some time for questions, although my hearing isn't that well, so if you have questions, please shout them. Okay, so just a disclaimer before we start. In this presentation, I'm not going to tell you or show you vulnerabilities inside the infrastructure. Actually, serverless would probably make your application the most secure that possible up to date. Of course, you'll have to work around with some constraints and configurations, but it could really work well in terms of security. Most of the examples will be on AWS because it's the most common one, but most of them also apply to other service provider that way or another. If you're interested, come talk to me after this talk. I beg for forgiveness. You might see some other Con logos here and there on the videos because I was preparing them for multiple ones. So let's start with some basic ground. What is serverless? Why people are moving to serverless? So we started in the late 80s or 90s on-prem, where everything was where the company that developed the application was building, was having to deal with all these resources and configurations. Skipping ahead, we have containers. Everyone knows about containers nowadays. But we still have to deal with some setups, patching the environments, making sure we don't have open ports, open services. We don't actually know what in there if we downloaded a container. Might be some things that we need to configure, of course, to scale. And of course, we have to take care about our applications. So when we move to the cloud, we don't have to deal with any of that. It's all given by the service provider. All we have to do is write up some code, which is the logic of the application, and make some small configurations mostly about permissions and environment variables and packages, but that's it. Everything else is taken care of. So that means you don't have to patch, you don't have to scale, you don't have to do anything else. Okay. Right. So is serverless really a thing? How many of you heard about serverless? Okay, that's about right. How many of you actually dealt with Lambda functions or cloud functions? Okay, cool. So what we see from our customers and what we see around is that many companies, and very big companies and also startups, are starting at least experimenting with serverless, and we believe this is the future, especially of cloud computing, so this is why we're there. Okay, so is serverless security a thing? It wasn't until recently. On the last re:Invent, AWS showed this presentation where they mentioned that serverless was the most hot topic over the whole event, and right after that was security. So, of course, from a nature as a security person, I don't trust them. So I went ahead and I went on Google Trend and I checked. So let's start with serverless computing. I'm just setting some configurations. Let's see the worldwide and the past 5 years. And you can see that there is a constant rise in dealing with serverless. And we believe it's going to grow and grow. So then I said, of course, the first thing that you do when you develop serverless is going to check about serverless security, because you don't want people to hack your serverless applications. And of course, this is the result. Constantly, from 0 to 1 in 3 years. And I'm pretty sure the 1 is me. So I don't know if you're dealing with serverless because you raised your hand. At least if you're not in the attacking side, make sure you know there is a difference and you have to do something different. And it's not going to work for you to keep your currently security controls. I mean, at least not all of them. So let's see how and why. Right. Sorry about that. Okay, so what do I mean serverless applications? Or where do your application live? So when you want to have your code running, because there are no servers, well, there are servers, of course, they're just not yours. You have to write your code somewhere, and it has to run somewhere. So the provider gives you a single-purpose container that will take your code just for the execution time, will run it, and when it's done, it's supposed to go away, so it doesn't leave anymore. So we have this container, and we have some some of the providers inside, so AWS, Google, IBM, SAP, all the big ones. So this is another reason why we know it's a thing. Everyone goes there. So what are these containers? First of all, they're read-only, except from /temp. Sorry, except from the /temp folder, which is where you're going to write your data into. So everything else is read-only. The containers, and within the containers, your code, they are spin up on events, triggered by events. So it's not necessarily calling them directly. I mean, you can use API gateway and REST APIs to trigger your functions, but that's not the only case. It might be 70% of the current cases, at least pretty much what we saw, but it's not the only case. You have emails that triggers functions directly. You have logs that triggers function. You have files. You have IoT, like MQTT protocol. You have, sorry for the typo, you have authentication services that will automatically trigger functions and code in your background. And there are many other events that could trigger your function, your code. So in the development perspective, this is crazy interesting because you don't have to actually wait for a request coming in. You can trigger your code to run on various changes of a database. So your database will change, and you want to trigger a code that will process that. So that is very nice in the development perspective, but it also has, of course, its security perspectives, which we will talk about. So I said the environment is read-only. All the data that you actually want to write, which is not permanent, you write into the /temp, and when the code finish, the container dies, and within all this data, so it's a temporary data. Of course, this is not entirely true because to keep on performance, what's happening is that the providers will keep your containers as long as requests are coming. You're not going to know on which container you're going to land, but there's probably going to be some data inside if this is a container, if this code writes into /temp and it is triggered pretty often that if you're getting access to this container, you might find some information inside /temp. So this is something that you want to take into account. Okay, the source code also reside in the container. So what happens is that when your first trigger comes up and triggers your code, what's happening is that the container spins up, and within the container, the code is mounted taken from other cloud resources, and then your code will run on this environment. It's a Linux environment, or if it's Azure, it's IaaS or different containers. So this is where the source code lives. And again, if you have access to the container, and we'll see, you want to get there. Also, another link to that same directory is proc1. And you can also get the source code from that directory. Another interesting thing is that your environment variables also live there, and you can get them by either of those. Why is the environment variables interesting? So apart of the fact that you might want people or companies might write their own keys into these environment variables for different resources, there are built-in keys inside these environment variables, especially if you're using AWS. Your Lambda function keys will be there. And why do I care? Because these keys have the permissions in the account, in the cloud account, of the function. So if I manage to get them out, I, from my home or my computer or wherever I am, can do the same thing as the function in the account. And more, of course, depends on the permissions, and we'll get into that. Okay, so I said it's ephemeral. It's also stateless. When a code runs, it doesn't know automatically. There is no session usually, so it doesn't really know what was before, what's happening after. These are all different microservices or even nanoservices, depends, that runs individually into a big picture of the application. And as a developer, you have to somehow connect all the dots, but also make sure you can make them secure. So you have to take care of, for example, your access control on each of your functions or each of your resources. There are ways to do that. Authentication, you have to make sure each of your functions is taking care of authentication, but it's not that easy because if you're not coming from a REST API and you might not have the authorization header, if it's it's a Lambda or a code that runs because an email was sent, how do you make sure the user is authenticated or within the organization, because emails can be spoofed, of course. So we'll see a demo about that as well. Okay. This is an example. This is an application that has an internal serverless environment where developers commit codes into the repository, and in order for the manager to, or whoever, the leader, team leader of the development, to review the code, there is a triggered email that is sent directly to the manager saying, hey, new code was, there is a new PR, go and check the code to approve it. But if the attacker has some internal knowledge and he wants to send, or he knows the email that's supposed to be sent to the environment, to the access to the manager, he can send it directly, spoofed email, of course. This will trigger code, and then a function will rise, will take actions according to your email. I don't know, it's just a scenario that is triggered by email. So how do you take care of that? Another very important aspect in serverless applications is the IAM roles, the access control. So as I said, each function within the account, within the cloud account, has a different permission within the account. And you, as a developer, have to make sure your function has the right permissions in the account. Guess what? They don't. We found that more than 95% of the function has some level of over permissions, because it's hard. There are, okay, this is easy for one function, but if you have hundreds of functions and they're constantly changing, how do you do that? How do you choose? If we're talking about AWS, they have more than 5,000 different permissions. So think about the developer. He knows how to write code, of course. His function works. Now you tell him, hey, make this function secure. So he goes into the documentation and gets lost because there are so many of them. So he probably go into the Stack Overflow or something like that, and will find the right permissions. And I'm gonna tell you, he's gonna have some, I apologize. He's gonna have some wildcards inside, which means that if you get these keys as an attacker, you can do some damage in the account. So this is how in AWS you define permissions. This is example of permissions to buckets. Buckets S3, cloud storage. This is very common. There was in the news lately many attacks or many breaches that occurs due to that specific permission. So S3, we have two things here. We have the action and the resource. So as you can see in this example, the action is set to S3 wildcard, which means that the permission of this specific function can do anything, any action that is related to S3 buckets. That means creating buckets, deleting buckets, changing permissions to buckets, so making internal buckets public, for example, which happened recently, adding resources, reading resources, whatever you want. And the second part, which is the resource, tells you that the specific function can do not only any action, but on every bucket in the account. So that means that if you get that access, you can not only poke into buckets that relates to this specific application, but you can do whatever you want to any cloud storage within the organization. You can do a lot of damage there. You can find a lot of interesting information there. There is actually a website, I think it's called Grey Warfare. It's like the showdown of the buckets. So if you go there, I did not add the link, sorry about that. If you go there, they have lists of, I don't know, I think it's millions now, of resources and buckets that are public. So you can see a lot of sensitive information over there. Okay, so your developer did that, but you know something about security, so you tell him, that's not good enough. Go and find me some better permissions. So he goes, and he finds that he can limit the permission to a specific bucket. So in this case, the function now can only do, or he can do whatever it wants, but only to a specific bucket, which is nice. But if you really want to go into security, you're going to do something like that. If your function only reads data from this specific bucket, you can give it a specific permission that tells the function you are only allowed to get an object, one specific object, or any other object, but only get one object at a time from this specific bucket. So this is a huge advantage. If you think about it in the AppSec perspective, this is crazy. This is so nice. You can really limit your permission and attack surface within your cloud account. But this is not really happening too often, and you can find a lot of functions that are over-permissive. This is because for one function it might be easy, but for a lot of them it's going to be hard. Okay, so we know web applications. There are one way, usually in HTTP, could be a TCP or any other protocol, but there is usually one way in where the attack goes to try your application, to exploit your application. And you're probably going to put all your security controls and all your guards on that entrance. But when you talk about serverless, it's not the same. They can come from a REST API gateway, but they can also trigger code from files, from analytics, from emails, from logs. How do you defend against that? So we'll see what you can actually do. So I said, REST APIs, okay, we know them, but we can also use third-party applications, and we'll see that in a second. Cloud storage can trigger authentication service, logs can trigger code, IoT, emails, notifications, and of course, code changes like commits, etc. Okay, so now we're going to see some demos of some examples that you can see why this is different and what you have to do in order to exploit serverless applications. So this first environment, we have a Slack channel that an application, the organization wrote a chatbot that interacts with the user. So it can be a support chatbot. The user writes some messages, and the chatbot responds according to the messages. These messages goes to the Slack API, of course. Then it goes to the API gateway and triggers a function. The function takes the messages, writes them into a DynamoDB table, which is a NoSQL database, and responds back according to what you wrote. So let's see a demo. Okay, so lot of screens here, but you can see on the top left the chat, the Slack chat, and the bot that responds to the user. So first, I'm interacting with it, but now I want to know and check if it's vulnerable. Let's say I already know that it uses some vulnerable dependencies. So I found in the internet this exploit, which relates to a specific vulnerability inside this application. Again, the attacks will probably be the same as on web application, but there are two main differences. The first one is that you can trigger them differently, and the second one is the information that you want to get out and how you exploit. Because if you're going to do a pen test, for example, and you're going to come with a report, hey, I hacked your container, here's your etc password file. No one cares about that in serverless. It's a template that resides in the container, and no one cares about that. So what you can do about it is something else. So I told you where sensitive information is. In source code, you can find environment variables, and how then you can go and further exploit the application. So here I have an exploit that I found in the internet, and I just want the first example. I'm doing a child process exec, and I want to see if I can get information out of the container. So I send this request through Slack, and you can see the bottom left that I got it into my HTTP tunnel. So this is just the first one. Now I want to extract some sensitive information. So I'm adding an ls to see what's in the environment, and you can see that there is a file called index.js. So that's interesting. Now I want to get the source code, maybe. So think about it. It's like you got the backend source code. So I'm doing cat index.js. I'm going to wrap it in base64 so I can send it over HTTP. And then I'm going to take the source code into my own computer and further go over it and see how I can further exploit it. So let's see. So it's just base64 at the moment. Okay, so echo, decode, and I get the source code. The source code that runs in the backend. So I go over the code and I see the information that helps the function interact with the Slack, and I can see that the function has a DynamoDB code there, line, SDK, AWS SDK, that does, if you look one line after that, DynamoDB.putItem. That means that the function writes into a DynamoDB database. But I don't want to write into the database, although I can. I want to try and do some other, and see what else I can do there. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to write a code, because I found that there is code injection here. And I'm going to use the AWS SDK in this case to run different code that will give me access to different resources within the cloud. So if you can see here, I'm doing require AWS SDK and HTTP because I want it. And then I'm going to do a DynamoDB.scan. Now, the difference between scan and putItem is that one writes into the database, and the other one gives me the whole database. It scans the database for the data. So I'm going to send that, but now I don't need the channel, I don't need the tunnel there, the ngrok tunnel, because the function itself interacts with Slack. So I can send myself the information through the Slack channel, right? And I don't need to know even the information, because I can just use the same code. So as you can see, I sent this Slack message, and I got all the database inside the Slack channel. And I also, just for the fun of it, changed the icon of the Slack bot. So as you can see, it might be the most similar way to attacking regular applications, although in this case, you want to know what to take out of it, which is source code, and try things like using AWS SDKs or other cloud providers' SDKs in order to exploit the application further. Okay, moving on. Right. moving on, we have another attack. This time in the environment setup, we're going to see a user or an application that triggers code based on files that are uploaded into a bucket. So the user sends a request into the API gateway, receives a signed URL, so the user can then directly upload a file into the S3 bucket. This is a secure way to do direct uploads because, okay, the bucket is secure, it is not public, and you get a signed URL which is valid for 5 minutes and only for the specific item that you are going to upload. So that is very secure. But it depends what happened afterwards. So we get a secure signed URL, and now we don't need the API gateway anymore. We can directly upload, of course, the file into the S3 bucket, which is okay. But when I upload the file into the bucket, what happens behind the scenes is that it triggers another code. Could be the same function, could be another function, but it triggers the code. The function then goes pull out this file that I just uploaded, and then it processes it. So if this function is insecure or has some poor code, then I can take exploit of that. So again, let's see a demo. Okay, so I have an application here. I'll discuss that application later, so you can also have fun with it. It's a DVSA application, Damn Vulnerable Serverless application. And you can see that in the feedback section, I can write up some feedbacks into the application. But there is also, it allows me to upload file, to attach file into that feedback. So I will upload a specific file. And I will see in the request that I got the signed URL in the response for this specific file. I'll go ahead and send that. Okay, so now that I learned that I can do that, I'm going to use a different file. This time, the file will have a curl inside the file name because the function is vulnerable to command injection, which we all know. So it's a Linux environment. So what I'm going to do now, if you can see, I'm going to try and steal the environment variables, which will then allow me to further exploit the account from within my computer. So I upload a file. Okay. And then on the right side, you can see that I got some requests coming in. I got the base64. Again, I'm going to decode that base64. This time, I'm not going to see code, but instead, I'm going to see the environment variables. So as I said, now I can create my own AWS account with these, or not account, AWS session with these keys. And you can see I just opened the AWS/credentials file where I can put all my AWS credentials. I created a new section and I put in these environment variables. They are temporary, at least the session token is temporary, but they live for a while, a few minutes, which can you can do enough damage in a few minutes. And of course, you can continue to get new keys with time if they expire. So now I used it, and you can see I'm from my own computer now. I'm not attacking the function anymore. From my own computer, I can write AWS, in this case, AWS CLI commands, and I can get information outside of the cloud account into my own computer. And if they look at the logs, they will see the function that is doing that. So it's not going to say, hey, there is another user using your credentials. They're going to see the function doing some weird stuff maybe, but the function is doing that. And you can see that I ran AWS S3LS, which give me the list of S3 buckets inside the account. I'm interested in one, so I'm going to do ls into a specific bucket with my profile. and I get a library folder. I'm going to get inside the folder, and then check and see that there are 2 files there. These are receipts. So I will try to get the specific receipt out of this environment. And then I was able to get that, storing it on my computer. And then, of course, if I want to do damage, then I can change those receipts, maybe then upload different receipts with my name, and then call the support and say, hey, I put up an order, I did not get it. They will go and check, and we'll see the receipts, and then, or you can send it to them, and then you might get your fake purchase. And you can see that I upload a new receipt into the account. Okay, S3 and API Gateway are still pretty standard. They might not be the most common in web applications, but they're pretty standard. So now we have another scenario where emails that are sent trigger a code. So this is an example of a C call for papers. Where you send an email with your proposal, there is a Lambda function or a code behind the scene that parses your attachment and responds back. So let's see how that works. Okay, so I'm sending an email that I attach with my proposal. And then I attach a normal innocent submission. And I get a response back saying, thank you. Right? This is a confirmation email. Thank you for your submission. Okay, so once I did that, now I want to do another one. Only this time I will send an eval submission. So this is just malware, okay? I'm trying my best here. So I'm sending a malware here. But I get a response saying that they identified this malware and with a link to a VirusTotal that specifies that they caught me. Okay, so that's not going to work, but I prepared a treat for you. So I created an exploit that, if you can see here, what it does is doing some AWS code to send an email in the name of the organization or the event. And also, I want to hijack the specific bucket that holds all these submissions. So then I upload this, I wrap it, I upload it to my own host. It doesn't matter where. I used S3, but it doesn't matter. You can upload it to any host. And then I have a file name attachment that will cause the Lambda function to go and fetch this code from my remote host, bring it down, and run this code. So this is the payload. You can see this. I'm going to try and hack this bucket here, which is denied at the moment because it's set with the right permissions. The bucket itself is set with the right permissions, but the function ain't. So, oh, sorry. So now I'm going to upload this malicious file. I sent some notification along the way so I can see that things are happening. And you can see the phishing email sent and the bucket was hijacked. Well, don't believe me, but I got a message that said, hey, thank you for your submission. You were accepted. I can do that, of course, whenever I want. And, of course, to get your honorarium money, click on this phishing site. And the recipient that I sent set it to my own account so I can get it, but I can set it to different people. So if I know that someone was accepted, I don't know, he published it really early, I can go and send him an email with a phishing website. And then this is the nicer part where I modified the permissions to this bucket. So now this bucket is public. And it had some sensitive information, but now anyone can get that information because I just changed the permissions of this bucket. The reason that I was able to do that, of course, is because the function that processed the function, the submission, did not have the get object permission, but it had a wildcard allowing it to do whatever it wants. Okay. So we see that we can exploit applications through emails, which is not so conventional in the regular web applications that we know. So now we're going to see a live demo. Hopefully it will work, and we'll finish with that. So I have Alexa here. Let's hope it's going to work. Alexa.
Sorry, I'm not sure.
Start Hack Me demo.
Welcome to Alexa, the hacking assistant demo.
What is my balance?
Please identify
Okay,
yourself.
you know what? 1 second. Bye. Let me
It
just...
was a pleasure to assist you.
Yeah, I know. Okay, so I have the MySQL here connected. It's live. If it's not disconnected, it probably is. Okay. Okay, so I have this MySQL database. I forgot to mention that. And there is an application that what it does, it gets some information through Alexa and gives you back information from the database. So that could be, of course, I said it in the demo to something more juicy, but it can be anything. It can be a service that you want to check the weather. It can be a service, I don't know, a Netflix service or a Hulu service that tells you what episodes are available to a specific, your own TV show, not your own, your favorite TV show. So it can be whatever. If it deals with MySQL in that case, it might, we might be able to hack it. So there is a limitation here because Alexa will translate your voice into text, but it will not translate special characters because they are special characters and it doesn't know to send them as special characters in order to translate them. So there is a big limitation here. So I did, until now, the demos that we saw was things that we saw in real application. This is more an experiment, but there are ways to do SQL injection without special characters, and we'll see that in a second. So let's try that again. Alexa, start Hack Me demo.
Welcome to Alexa, the hacking assistant demo.
What is my balance?
Please identify yourself.
Lisa,
What is your secret ID?
2018.
The balance for account ID 2018 is $15,000.
Of course, 2018 is not a secret, but you'll have to excuse me for this demo. I didn't want to deal with larger numbers. What is my balance? Alexa, what is my balance?
Please identify yourself.
Admin,
What is your secret ID?
1234. I don't know it.
Sorry, I can't understand the command. Please say again.
What is my balance?
Please identify yourself.
Admin,
What is your secret ID?
1234.
Sorry, you are unauthorized.
Of course. What is my balance?
Please identify yourself.
Lisa,
What is your secret ID?
1234 or true.
The balance for account ID 1234 or true is $1,250,419.
So, thanks.
Waiting for your command.
Bye. Okay, thanks, Alexa. Okay, so there are ways to do some SQL injection without special characters. If you're using integers, you can deviate from the original integer and continue with another command. So I was able to bypass that with an or true, or of course something more like, I don't know, I could do even 1, 2, 3, like 1, 2, 3. It still returns true. So why is it different than in regular applications? Because if you go into Alexa development, Alexa skills, you'll see that there are two ways to do that. Either using function Lambda functions that are triggered through your voice, or you give it, if you have a server, a real server, God forbid, that you can give it an API, a REST API that it can communicate with. But the most common one will be using the AWS SDK for the Lambda function that will be triggered from the Alexa. So this is something that you probably won't be seeing with regular applications. So, and this is unexpected. If you are a normal application, you live in the AppSec world for years, 10 years, 20 years, you don't think that maybe someone can trigger your code through voice. This is not something that you would expect. So you need some other perspective when dealing in security. Okay. I showed some examples. There are many other things that you can do that would probably not going to work on regular applications. For example, if you deal with analytics, AWS gives you Kinesis, which gets a lot of information, do some analytics, and gives you out the output. It has SQL, so when you want to get your information, you actually write a .SQL file, which the Kinesis will use. So if you have a .SQL file, you probably, or not probably, but you might have SQL injection. So if you can send some weird commands into the application, even through, it doesn't have to be directly to the application, but anything that will trigger logs, you might actually be able to run backend code from different locations in the account. Of course, to know that, it's pretty difficult, and you might need to either have some prior knowledge, or you are inside, or you found a vulnerability and you are trying some lateral movement there. Another example could be codes. So if you have an open source code that has some Lambda functions behind it that is triggered whenever someone commits a code, you might be able to hack it with some metadata or even lines in the code. Depends, of course, what the function is doing. Again, this is not so common on a regular application. How about cross-site scripting? We all know that from web applications. Does it exist? Yeah. It might be less common if you're using more advanced JavaScript and frameworks like React or jQuery, because they help you in some ways. But you can actually get SQL XSS through MQTT, which in this case will push you the XSS to your environment. But again, the payloads will be the same payloads. The only thing that changes is what you want to get out of it and how you interact with the system. You can trigger XSS through SCS, emails, or notifications. How about XXE? I don't know if you read the news. It really exists in serverless. So again, XXE, the payloads, the payloads itself would be the same. It's still XXE. But you don't want to get the etc password file because it doesn't interest anyone. you want to get the var task handler.python or index.js. So this is the only thing. Of course, it also depends on the XML processor there. And if they use vulnerable libraries or vulnerable versions of libraries, then you're still going to be able to extract some data through XXC. On Lambda function, you can get the handler, the source code out of the environment. It will be pretty hard to get the environment variable because there is some null bytes when you're going to get that, and it's going to trigger an error or throw an error through the XML parser. Okay, some related content that might help you to dig more into that. So I started the OWASP Serverless Top 10 project. There is a final report ready, which at the current state takes the regular OWASP Top 10 and go one by one and discuss how is that relevant to serverless and what the attack vectors are, what the payloads, and what the mitigations are, which are different. We are, of course, working on getting tailored serverless top 10 for the serverless environment. There is an open data call which you can, we would love if you can contribute. Another project is the Then Vulnerable Server application. It's an application, open source application that I wrote that has dozens of resources that you can exploit, and you can install that either from GitHub or from the AWS repository with 3 clicks, and you have it. Don't install it in production, please. I warned you live. It's going live. It's recorded. Don't install that in production. I warned you. It's not going to fall under me when your company fires you. Other talks, if you're hanging in OWASP DC or in Sector Toronto, you're welcome to see some other talks. Thank you very much for coming. I really appreciate it.